I'm Zuri Flores, 30, a college lecturer in Chicago. My wedding night should have been sacred. Everything was perfect until my mother, Martha, approached. The music faded, and she delivered the blow with a gracious, predatory smile. "Darling, we've decided to give your car, your brand new BMW, to your sister, Piper." The words weren't a question, they were a public declaration of ownership. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just about a car, it was the ultimate, public violation of my boundaries and my success. Did they really think their public demand would receive nothing but public compliance? To understand the wedding disaster, you need the backstory. I was raised as the strong one. That label wasn't a compliment, it was a job description. I was the eldest daughter expected to hold everything together, emotionally and, later, financially. My sister, Piper, was the opposite, the golden child. She was celebrated for her charm and looks, never for effort or ethics. While I was earning my PhD based on intellect, my parents only admired Piper's compliance and appearance. My strength was never seen as something to be proud of, but as a resource to be tapped. Every family demand, every sacrifice I made, from tutoring Piper for free to covering my father's small debts, was framed as what the strong one does. I learned early that my needs were secondary. The car wasn't the first, or even the 10th, thing they'd tried to take. It was simply the most public. I built a solid career so I could build a wall, but they saw the wall as a vault to be cracked. That constant, quiet resentment had been simmering for decades. But how did my quiet resentment finally become a strategic plan to shut them down publicly? Being the dependable one didn't earn me recognition, it made me invisible. My parents used my success, my prestigious lecture position, my Chicago apartment, not as a source of pride, but as proof that their parenting worked. They rarely praised the effort, only the outcome that benefited them. I was the silent, dependable anchor holding the whole toxic ship steady. I was a success used solely as a shield for their mediocrity and a source of emergency funding for Piper. My needs were never even on the agenda. The constant demand for sacrifices wore me down. It was emotional fatigue disguised as family obligation. As a respected lecturer, I finally realized the brutal truth: my strength had become a leash. It was a tool they pulled whenever someone, usually Piper, wanted something from me. My accomplishments simply raised the price of admission to my own life. They didn't see me as Zuri, the intellectual, the professor, they saw me as Zuri, the bank, and the fixer. The wedding car was just the newest, shiniest representation of what they felt entitled to. This realization had been simmering, a quiet rage preparing for its debut. I was determined that my wedding day, the day I started a new life, would be the day I finally cut that leash. But after years of compliance, how could I suddenly stand up to them without fracturing the entire ceremony and losing everything? Did I really have a plan ready for the moment they publicly humiliated me? The band, sensing the shift, started playing again, but the warmth of the celebration had turned cold. My mother squeezed my hand, putting on her most persuasive, motherly tone, the one she used to rationalize every theft. "You can afford another car, dear. Piper needs it more than you do right now." That was the same pattern from childhood, repeated on my wedding day. My success was always their justification for demanding sacrifices. They reframed their entitlement as my generosity, their greed as Piper's need. The manipulation was sweet, sticky, and utterly sickening. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream the truth, but years of training kept me silent. I was supposed to nod, accept the betrayal, and thank them for the lesson in generosity. But not today. Not on Evan's time. Was this the moment I finally broke the script, or would I let them steal my car and my confidence? My father, Frank, stepped in with the classic deflection. "Zuri, it's just fairness. Piper has more needs right now, you're doing so well." They were trying to tell me that my stability was a liability, and Piper's instability was a virtue. They'd always used my financial security as permission to take from me. The moment was utterly surreal, how easily my own family could reframe outright theft as an act of familial love and equity. It was a slow, inner breaking, realizing the depth of their entitlement hadn't lessened, even on my wedding day. Their words were designed to make me feel small, guilty, and compliant. But the pain only sharpened my focus. They saw a submissive daughter, they didn't see the legal document clutched in my hand. They believed they were setting a family precedent, but what was the unseen weapon I had been preparing for weeks that was about to shatter theirs? Their entitlement wasn't limited to family gatherings. Weeks before the wedding, they showed up unannounced at my Chicago campus, marching right into my lecture hall. They completely derailed my talk on ethical philosophy, trying to pressure me into loaning Piper money for a ridiculous business venture. My father joked loudly, "You professors have so much free time, Zuri. You can certainly make time for your sister." The entire class watched me shrink. They didn't see my career as a serious pursuit, they saw it as a flexible schedule and a disposable income source. My professional space meant nothing to them. I eventually deflected them, but that public humiliation was a deliberate message: we control you everywhere. It was the moment I realized that polite boundaries were useless. I needed a legal, undeniable firewall. That incident was the fuel. But what exactly did I put into my legal firewall that would make my family realize they had finally crossed the wrong professor? Just weeks ago, I received an extremely competitive academic grant, a $50,000 award that validated years of research. When I told my parents, my father shrugged and called it paperwork. My mother immediately asked if the money was transferable to Piper, who needed a down payment for a failed boutique venture. My life's efforts, my intellect, my career, my financial discipline meant absolutely nothing when compared to Piper's fleeting wants. Their priorities were clear: I was only valuable as an ATM machine, not as a human being. That cold dismissal solidified my resolve. They didn't deserve a gentle separation, they deserved a clear, public statement that their era of entitlement was over. The wedding was the final testing ground. When my mother announced the car theft, it wasn't a shock, it was confirmation. It was the final, undeniable proof that I had to choose myself and Evan over their toxic script. I had already prepared my counterattack based on the lack of respect for my invisible achievements. But what kind of counterattack could a college professor launch on her wedding day to truly shatter a toxic family's power? I looked at my mother's smug, entitled face, and something inside me finally broke, the decades-long chain of compliance. No more. Not on my wedding day. I took a deep, silent breath on the dance floor and decided to reclaim my power. The music faded for me. When my mother leaned in, a smirk playing on her lips, expecting my usual defeat, I smiled back. My smile was quiet, cold, and entirely authentic. It was the smile of a predator turning on its captors. I wasn't just surviving, I was initiating the end game. I spoke calmly, my voice low but perfectly clear, ensuring only my parents and Piper heard the initial detonation. I delivered the first strike, hitting them where it hurt: their social standing and their expectations of payment. I said, "The thin, lovely envelope you gave us was empty. So, no." The words sliced through the lingering music like a knife. My mother's jaw dropped. The power flowed out of her and into me. I had publicly rejected the family script for the first time. But how far would they go to regain control after being publicly denied? Before she could launch her counterattack, Piper stepped forward. She gasped theatrically, her eyes wide with fake offense, playing to the crowd. "Wow, Zuri. Big sister thinks she's brave now? Trying to start drama on your day?" Classic self-sabotage. Piper's usual tactic was public humiliation through false victimhood. She was trying to trigger the decades of conditioning that told me I was the drama starter, the ungrateful daughter. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the visceral sting of that familiar, toxic rhetoric. For a split second, I nearly crumbled into the old, apologetic Zuri. But then I felt it, a surge of cold, righteous anger. This wasn't the panic I was used to. This was liberation. I realized I didn't care what the guests, or my family, thought. I was finally standing up for myself and Evan. This anger was not destruction, it was definition. It was the clarity of knowing I was right and they were fundamentally wrong. They pushed me into this corner, and now I was armed. But would my family resort to emotional warfare or total public meltdown when they realized my anger was backed by legal authority? Just as Piper was delivering her sneering critique, Evan, my new husband, squeezed my hand. His grip wasn't tentative, it was a solid, unwavering affirmation of trust. I didn't have to look at him to know his mind was clear. He wasn't confused or scared by my family's public drama, he was standing with me, ready for war. That single gesture was everything. In a family that demanded emotional sacrifice, Evan offered emotional solidarity. He was my anchor in the eye of their toxic storm, and his presence alone was a massive shift in the dynamic. He silently told them, "She is not alone anymore." Then he spoke. His voice was calm, measured, and utterly devoid of panic, the voice of a man who dealt with high-stakes corporate negotiations daily. He didn't engage with Piper's drama. He addressed me, politely yet firmly, "Zuri, love. Give me the envelope." It was the signal. He knew exactly what that envelope contained, and he was taking control of the procedural side of the confrontation. My family was momentarily stunned. They expected hysteria, tears, or a heated argument. They received professional, surgical control. The air in the ballroom thickened as the guests realized this wasn't just a petty family squabble. I slipped the thin, legal envelope into Evan's hand. The texture of the paper felt like the sharp edge of a boundary line. The crowd was silent now, sensing the gravity of the shift. This was the moment I stopped being the scapegoat daughter and became part of an unstoppable unit. My family's power relies on secrecy and isolating their victim. Evan's public alliance stripped them of both. My mother's eyes darted from the envelope to Evan's face, realizing she had miscalculated the intelligence and loyalty of my husband. She had planned for Zuri Flores, the victim, not Zuri Chen, the wife. Evan's simple action elevated the confrontation from a family squabble to a legal and ethical standoff. He wasn't saving me, he was enabling me. He gave me the space to be the professional I was, not the daughter they demanded. My core was steady, fueled by his trust. The ballroom silence had become a courtroom of truth. They were demanding my car. I was about to demand their compliance with the law. But what shocking legal terms were detailed inside the envelope that would completely void my family's power? I took the thin, flat envelope from Evan. I didn't open it yet, I simply held it, letting the weight of the moment sink in. My parents expected me to lash out emotionally, but they forgot I specialize in rational argument. My tone shifted entirely, becoming calm, measured, and utterly professorial, the voice I use when dismantling flawed ethical arguments in my lecture hall. I wasn't begging them to respect my boundaries, I was teaching them a consequence. My mother blinked, confused by this cold, intellectual response. My mother tried to interrupt, "Don't be dramatic, Zuri. We're family, we talk." I cut her off, politely but definitively, like closing a textbook, "This discussion is over. Martha. The transaction you announced is invalid." I used her first name, a deliberate act of detaching the role of daughter from the role of opponent. The family script was officially shattered. For years, my existence was defined by compliance and guilt. Now, it was defined by documentation and legal finality. Evan stood slightly behind me, my silent, powerful support. Their sweet manipulation had hit a legal wall they never expected. The silence of the ballroom truly turned into a courtroom of truth. Every guest was now a witness. My parents and Piper were suddenly the ones on trial, not me. Their faces started to register fear, recognizing that they had pushed the wrong button. On the wrong day, with the wrong Zuri. They saw the professional, the intellectual, the wife who finally said no, and backed it up with paperwork. This wasn't an emotional outburst they could dismiss. This was strategy. The tension was palpable. But what was the exact legal weapon contained within that flat envelope that would immediately strip them of their entitlement to my property? I met my mother's desperate gaze. She was pleading with her eyes for the old Zuri, the one who would wilt under pressure, the one who would apologize for making her feel uncomfortable. But that Zuri was gone. For the first time, I refused the role assigned to me since birth. I was not the martyr, the scapegoat, or the ATM. I was Zuri Chen, the professor, the wife, and the boundary setter. I finally understood, compliance was not love, it was permission for continuous abuse. By standing firm, I was not attacking them, I was finally defending myself. My father whispered, "Let's talk about this later, Zuri. We'll give you something else." They were already trying to revert to the old script, bribe the strong one to silence her. I shook my head slowly, definitively. "No, Frank. This is the moment we talk. You made a public demand on my wedding day. You get a public, factual response. The entire family script, the one written by their entitlement and my guilt, was visibly torn into pieces. I felt an overwhelming sense of lightness, a freedom I hadn't realized I craved. I finally had the vocabulary to fight them, not the language of emotion, which they specialized in, but the cold, hard language of the law. I tapped the envelope. "This document is the boundary line you asked for. You insisted on crossing my personal boundaries, now you must deal with my legal ones." The car was just the symbol. The core of the issue was that they believed they were above the rules because they were family. I was showing them that the law applies to everyone, regardless of blood relation. This was my final lesson to the people who claimed to teach me everything. Piper, realizing the conversation had slipped far beyond her usual theatrics, started to panic. She clutched my mother's arm. "Mom, what is she doing?" "It's just Zuri. Stop her." Her fear was real, finally unmasking her calculated charm. She had always relied on my compliance to protect her from the real-world consequences of her impulsivity. But my compliance had expired. The crowd sensed the tension was about to reach a crescendo. This wasn't a wedding moment, it was a reckoning. The silence wasn't respect, it was anticipation for the full, legal revelation. I inhaled, letting the calm control settle over me, and handed the document to Evan. It felt like I was physically handing over the old narrative. The cycle was broken, not with tears, but with legal action. We were past the point of return. I had prioritized my mental peace and the integrity of my marriage over the manufactured peace of my family. This act was the definitive, non-negotiable end of my role as their victim. I let my gaze sweep over the tables. They were all watching. Friends, colleagues, Evan's family, all witnessing the public execution of the strong one narrative. This was accountability, served cold on fine china. The only thing left was the declaration. What exact consequence did my legal document lay out for my parents' attempted car theft, and how would it publicly expose their long history of financial abuse? Evan smoothly unfolded the document, a pristine, legal contract, signed and notarized, dated 2 days prior. I didn't need to read the words, I already knew them by heart. I didn't raise my voice, I simply let the facts speak for themselves. I looked at my mother and father, who were now shifting uncomfortably, and began my final lecture. When you publicly announced the theft of my BMW, you provided the necessary public proof of violation. Luckily, I prepared a legal defense for this exact scenario. I showed the heading to my mother. The title read, Binding Agreement, Anti-Theft Repossession of Z Flores Vehicle. I explained, 2 days ago, I transferred the title of the BMW to an irrevocable trust managed by Evan and me. The contract stipulates that any attempt by a third party, including direct family, to claim or move the vehicle constitutes felony theft. My mother's face went white. She stammered, "A trust? Why?" I answered, "Because I no longer trust you, Martha. And the penalty is severe." Piper let out a choked sound and sank into a chair, finally silent. The dream of the free BMW had just dissolved into a potential criminal record. My father tried to regain authority. "Zuri, don't be ridiculous. We'll just park it back." I calmly presented the most devastating clause. Clause 4, any attempted violation triggers immediate reporting to the Chicago PD for attempted grand theft. And Clause 5, this agreement also requires immediate repayment of all outstanding personal loans and debts owed to me, dating back 10 years, with interest. Their faces showed the true shock. The debt was the real time bomb. I handed the contract and the microphone to Evan, allowing him to deliver the final professional warning. He spoke to the room, but his eyes were locked on my parents. "You have 24 hours to comply with the repayment schedule and sign a legal acknowledgement of the trust. Failure to comply will result in criminal charges and a public civil lawsuit detailing all financial history." He paused, letting the weight of financial history land. The truth was out. But how would my parents, cornered and facing ruin, react to this public, non-negotiable ultimatum? The silence was short-lived. My mother, Martha, completely lost her composure. Her face, usually controlled and poised for public appearance, crumbled into pure, unadulterated rage. She pointed a trembling finger at me and shrieked, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "You ungrateful little monster. We gave you everything, and you repay us with this legal trash. After all we sacrificed for you, Zuri, the least you could do is..." Her mask of the caring mother had fallen, exposing the furious, entitled woman beneath. The guests watched, horrified. My father, Frank, ever the strategic manipulator, grabbed my arm, his voice dropping to a theatrical, desperate whisper. He was aiming for my guilt. "Zuri, please. Think about your sister. This will ruin us. We'll lose the house. Don't do this to your family." He tried to use the universal word, family, as a weapon of last resort. But I was immune. I pulled my arm away gently but firmly. His desperation wasn't born from love for me, but from fear of the debt collection and the loss of social standing. He was terrified of being publicly exposed as a financial failure. Piper, seeing both parents fail, spat out her final venom. "You only did this because you hate that I'm getting married before you. You're jealous." It was a desperate, final attempt to shame me back into submission. But her words had no power anymore. I turned to my family one last time, my expression completely blank, professional. "The problem, Frank and Martha, is that I don't hate you. I simply no longer care. This is a business matter now. The debt is due." Evan then stepped forward, gently taking my arm, and spoke over the noise of their sputtering anger. "Let's continue the celebration, everyone. The show is over." I broke the cycle, not with a breakdown, but with a clean, legal cut. I knew they would try one last, desperate thing to save face. But what was the family's next, truly explosive action, and would the guests support me or side with the victims of the ungrateful daughter? The absolute silence following Evan's command was the most powerful sound of the night. My parents expected the guests, especially their friends, to rush to their defense, to console the victims of the ungrateful daughter. But no one moved. The room was split. On one side, my toxic family, isolated and exposed. On the other, every single guest, quietly but firmly aligned with Evan and me. It was the public verdict I never asked for but desperately needed. My professional peers nodded slightly, acknowledging the professor's precise strategy. The true horror dawned on my mother. It wasn't the loss of the car or the debt, it was the total collapse of their public image. Their friends were now witnesses to their greed and manipulation. My father whispered hoarsely to her, "Martha, the Johnsons are watching." That line summed up their entire value system, appearance over integrity. This isolation was the true revenge. The fear of social ruin outweighed the fury of financial loss. I watched their carefully constructed world shatter on the ballroom floor. Piper's face was no longer filled with theatrical anger, but with cold, calculating hatred. She finally understood that I was not the sister she could push around. I was the wall she could not climb. The worst part for her? She couldn't use her charm or tears to fix this. Evan and I had preempted every single emotional tactic. I knew that the most dangerous move was still ahead. A cornered animal will lash out blindly. My family was now a cornered animal, and the remaining wedding reception was their cage. Evan signaled the band to start playing, deliberately turning his back on the ensuing whispers. We were reclaiming the day. The silence was broken, but the emotional tension was still taut. A stretched wire. The confrontation was won, but the aftermath was uncertain. My family had lost their power, but not their capacity for malice. I knew the final, desperate scene was waiting to explode. Would they risk utter social destruction by staying and trying to fight, or would they finally choose retreat? Evan's face was calm, but his eyes held an iron resolve. He gently raised his hand, and the band instantly cut the music. He was intentionally escalating the confrontation, leaving no room for whispers or ambiguity. He knew that for the cycle to truly break, the truth had to be undeniable. He spoke into the microphone, his voice resonating across the ballroom. My apologies, everyone. There is one crucial addendum to the legal document that requires immediate public notification. This concerns the full financial history mentioned earlier. My mother shrieked, a sound of utter betrayal, and lunged toward the stage. Evan's groomsmen, alerted by our private signal, gently but firmly blocked her path. Lies. All lies. Zuri, you're mentally ill. This is slander, she screamed. I didn't flinch. I let her words hang in the air. Her panic was the only verification the guests needed. Her attempt to discredit me by attacking my sanity failed, because the numbers spoke a universal language. I knew this was the single most damaging moment for their reputation. Evan took the microphone back, his voice cutting through Martha's sobs. The legal agreement requires full repayment within 90 days. Failure to meet the first scheduled payment in 24 hours will result in the filing of both a civil lawsuit for debt collection and the criminal charges against Frank and Martha Flores for attempted grand theft. He didn't use flowery language, he used legal deadlines and legal threats. He made it clear that this was not a family fight, it was a non-negotiable legal process. The threat was the lawsuit and the exposure of their 10-year scheme. Frank, the supposed pillar of the family, simply collapsed into his chair. He didn't fight back or argue. His face was a mask of defeat. He knew the numbers were accurate, the paper trail was real, and his reputation, the only thing he truly valued, was irrevocably destroyed. His silence was the final, devastating admission of guilt. He saw the whole chessboard being swept clean by the one person he thought he had successfully neutralized, his intellectual, financially disciplined daughter. Piper, whose wedding was next month, finally grasped the true consequence, the potential ruin of her engagement. Her fiancé's wealthy family was present. She looked at me, not with hatred, but with pleading, silent terror. Her gold digger scheme was now exposed to the very people she was trying to impress. Her entire future was now resting on whether her parents could somehow magically repay $215,000 in 24 hours. It was a beautiful, karmic trap. Their greed to take my car led to the public exposure of everything. I gently placed the contract on the family table, next to the half-eaten cake. It was a final, symbolic severance. I looked at the three broken people, no longer my family, but legally defined opponents. We wish you both a very happy life, I said, my voice empty of emotion, referring only to Evan and myself. But the professional relationship ends here. We won't be requiring your presence for the remainder of the evening. I walked away, the ghost of the scapegoat daughter finally laid to rest. Evan put his arm around me, a clear shield against their venom. He guided me away from the toxic corner and toward the other guests. And then, the most beautiful sound, polite, then growing, applause. The guests were standing up for us. They chose accountability. It was the validation of a lifetime, that I wasn't the problem, they were. Evan leaned in and whispered, "Happy wedding day, Professor Chen. The revenge was perfect, swift, legal, and public." It was the only language they understood. We danced, free from their shadow, on our wedding day. The cycle was severed. But in a family defined by entitlement and pride, $215,000 and the fear of jail time is not enough to secure silence. Did my family comply with the 24-hour deadline, or did they risk everything by escalating their public fight one final, disastrous time? The 24 hours following the wedding were quieter than I expected, but the tension was thicker than any silence. Evan and I spent our first day as husband and wife monitoring the legal email account and our bank account. We knew that my family's choice was simple: surrender and begin the repayment process, or escalate and face felony charges and public financial ruin. I was calm, not because I was happy, but because I had finally done the ethical, necessary thing. I had prepared for their full defiance. I had not allowed myself to hope for their compliance. Exactly 5 minutes before the 24-hour deadline, my phone buzzed with an alert. Evan leaned over, his eyes scanning the screen. It was a transfer notification. Frank and Martha Flores had complied. The initial payment of $5,000 had landed in the trust account, along with an unsigned legal acknowledgement of the debt, sent via their lawyer. They chose shame over total ruin. The sheer terror of public social and legal destruction, especially to their corporate friends, was enough to force their compliance. I felt no joy, only a deep, clean sense of finality. I closed the app and put the phone down. The screen was dark, and the family's shadow was finally lifted. Evan smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. The cycle was broken, and our future was truly ours. The debt collection was running smoothly, handled by the trust lawyer. My personal involvement was minimal, which was the point. We were enjoying a newfound peace, a quiet that had always been absent from my life. But in family revenge stories, there's always one loose end, one final, satisfying twist. Mine came in the form of a thick, creamy envelope delivered to our new address. It looked like a wedding invitation, but it was anything but. It was a formal document, and it addressed the other party in this toxic drama, Piper. Evan raised an eyebrow as I slid out a detailed invoice. This wasn't a legal threat, it was a bill. A truly meticulous bill for every single resource Piper had demanded. Taken, or destroyed over the past decade, leveraging my financial records. It included my law school textbooks she borrowed and ruined, $950, the laptop she broke, $1,200, and, most satisfyingly, every cent of rent and utility she owed me while staying temporarily in my apartment, $18,500. The title of the invoice was simple: the cost of entitlement. The total amounted to a significant, painful figure for Piper. This wasn't about the money for me, it was about the acknowledgement of the invisible labor and resources they had stolen through emotional blackmail. The letter accompanying the invoice stated that I would not file a lawsuit, provided she pay the full amount before her wedding. The choice was hers: pay the debt and salvage her future, or face an identical public exposure just before her own big day. We gave her a taste of her own manipulative medicine, only this time, the threat was backed by irrefutable facts. We never spoke to Piper again. But 3 days later, the full, substantial amount landed in the account. She had capitulated entirely. Her greed for the social climb was far greater than her pride. She made the only rational decision, sacrificing her pride and leveraging her fiancé's family for the cash to save face. The silence that followed was complete, final, and truly restorative. They were gone. Out of our lives. The debt was being repaid, and the toxic cycle, built on emotional and financial theft, was irrevocably severed. Evan and I didn't celebrate the payment, we celebrated the act of severing. We blocked their numbers, erased their emails, and donated the wedding gifts they had sent. We established a firm, legal firewall that protected our home and our finances. The two legal envelopes, the public one and the private one, had achieved total victory. They had enforced accountability for both the major financial abuse and the petty, decade-long theft of resources. We were safe. Looking at my reflection, I no longer saw the nervous scapegoat daughter. I saw Professor Chen, the woman who took back her life with cold, precise strategy. My revenge wasn't loud, it was documented. It was a lesson in accountability taught to people who believed they were exempt from consequences. Evan and the legal documents didn't save me, they empowered me to save myself. The power dynamic had permanently shifted from their hands to mine. My story is not just about financial revenge, it's about realizing that love cannot be transactional. You don't owe loyalty to people who demand your silence and your resources. When your family operates like a corporation, you have the right and the duty to treat them like one. You must speak their language, the language of law and consequence. Now, I have my peace, my husband, and my money back. But I want to ask you, what kind of legal armor are you building to protect yourself from your own family's toxicity? The noise was gone. For weeks, the silence in my head has been almost deafening, a foreign, beautiful quiet I hadn't realized was possible. That silence was the real trophy, far more valuable than the debt repayment. I spent so many years bracing for the next emergency, the next crisis, the next demand. Now, there was just space. Space to breathe, space to think, space to be happy. I finally realized that the abuse wasn't just in the taking, it was in the constant, exhausting expectation of my compliance. People ask if I felt happy watching my family crumble. The truth is, I didn't. That feeling would have been revenge. What I felt was justice, a cold, necessary relief that the scale had been balanced. I didn't want them to suffer, I wanted them to be held accountable. And accountability, for narcissists, feels exactly like suffering. It forces them to see themselves through an external, unbiased lens. Evan reminded me, you didn't destroy them, Zuri. You simply stopped protecting them from themselves. That was the core of the resolution. I chose self-preservation over family preservation. Returning to my university class felt different. I wasn't carrying the heavy mantle of family martyr anymore. I was simply the professor, respected for my intellect and work. The internal resources I once spent on managing their chaos were now invested entirely in my career and my marriage. I realized that my most valuable asset was not my money, but my emotional bandwidth. By cutting them off, I reclaimed my mental energy, my focus, and my joy. I went from being the family ATM to being the CEO of my own life. My new family wasn't defined by blood, but by choice and mutual respect. Evan and I stood together, our bond strengthened by the storm we survived. We had built a foundation based on truth and accountability, not guilt and manipulation. We were protected by our love and, yes, by an ironclad legal firewall. The old chapter was closed. But what were the lasting, long-term effects of this public severance on my parents' social standing? And what lessons can you take from my story to secure your own financial and emotional freedom? The social ramifications were slow, but devastating. My parents were experts at controlling their narrative, but the sheer cost of the debt and the public scene at the wedding were too much to bury. They faced quiet exclusion from their elite circles. That loss of status, the very thing they valued more than their own children, was the final, exquisite punishment. They traded their daughter's stability for momentary financial gain, and ultimately lost both. I now had total, sovereign control over my finances. Every dollar I earned was mine to keep, invest, or spend on things that brought Evan and me genuine happiness. I never fully appreciated the mental toll of constantly guarding my bank account against my own family. That freedom, the simple right to financial autonomy, was the truest form of recovery. I am not just financially solvent, I am financially protected by the boundaries I established. Evan and I made a pact: every major life decision, financial or otherwise, would start with a conversation about clear boundaries and legal documentation. We have created a marital agreement, not out of distrust, but out of learned wisdom. My trauma became our joint strategy. Our foundation is a legal, emotional, and financial partnership built on mutual respect and ironclad protection. The revenge wasn't the goal, the stability it bought was the reward. I never saw my family again, and I never will. I have zero interest in their struggles or their fake apologies. My recovery required total, permanent severance. My only regret is that it took me so long to prioritize myself. To anyone watching who recognizes themselves as the family scapegoat, your silence protects them, not you. Your voice is your most powerful legal and emotional weapon. Take back control of your narrative, your assets, and your peace. The end of my story is not about revenge, it's about the beginning of a life of authenticity. My final act of defiance was my own happiness. So, the car theft became the catalyst for financial freedom and emotional peace. You've seen how I did it with contracts and public exposure. Now, I have to ask you, my friend, what is the one legal document or financial move you need to make this week to finally stop being the family's ATM and start living your own life? The silence was total. But for narcissistic people, silence is not acceptance, it's the greatest form of disrespect. My parents and Piper couldn't stand the lack of control. They couldn't stand that their usual tactics, guilt, tears, and rage, were being met with ironclad legal documents. I knew the peace was a temporary calm before their final, desperate storm. The cycle may have been broken, but their capacity for malice remained intact. Since they couldn't reach me directly, they took the fight public again, this time with a personal, coordinated digital assault. My mother posted lengthy, dramatic Facebook rants about my mental instability and betrayal. Piper started an anonymous smear campaign on my university's message boards, claiming I was an unethical professor who stole from her own family. It was the usual narcissistic projection: accuse others of what you are guilty of. But this time, I had a plan. I didn't engage with the social media noise. I sent the posts and the university forum links straight to my lawyer. Harassment is harassment, regardless of whether it's online or in person. We filed for an immediate, stringent restraining order against all three of them: Martha, Frank, and Piper. The evidence of their prior public actions, the wedding scene, combined with the new digital paper trail made the case airtight. The court granted the order instantly. This wasn't about revenge, it was about establishing the permanent legal boundary they refused to respect. The sight of a police officer serving them the papers must have been the ultimate humiliation. The restraining order explicitly forbade them from contacting me, Evan, or my workplace, online or in person, or face jail time. Frank actually tried to call Evan one last time, begging him to talk sense into me. Evan's response was simple and final: Professor Chen has instructed me to refer all matters to her legal counsel. Any further contact will be viewed as a violation. That was it. The final, formal, cold door slammed shut. My reputation at the university was never truly harmed. The administration, aware of my legal expertise and Evan's reputation, quietly supported me. Piper, however, did lose face. Her fiancé's family, already questioning the $21,000 payment, pulled the plug on the wedding 2 weeks before the date. The karma of the BMW theft and the financial abuse had come full circle, striking her where it hurt most: her social ambition. People often confuse revenge with resolution. True resolution is not their downfall, it's the establishment of your own unshakable foundation. My revenge was simply the boundary. I used their own fear of public disgrace and legal consequence to build a wall of protection around my life. I wasn't cruel, I was merely objective. They are still paying the debt, but the debt of their malice is now something they pay alone, with no one left to bail them out. Toxic family dynamics thrive on blurred lines and emotional manipulation. The only antidote is clarity, detachment, and documentation. If you are struggling with a family that sees you as an asset, remember, you are a person, not a resource. Your peace is worth more than their comfort. Your no is the most powerful contract you will ever sign. Use the law, use the system, and never let them weaponize your kindness against you again. My wedding day was explosive, but it was the day I finally divorced my family of origin. The legal battle ensured that the divorce was permanent. I am free. I am safe. I am happy. And for the first time in my life, I am living authentically, defined only by my own choices. My new life is the only closure I needed. I showed you how legal and public exposure forced accountability. But the emotional toll of that journey is immense. I want to hear your stories. Have you had to use legal action against your own family? What was the final line that you had to draw to protect your peace? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice delivered in the most unexpected ways. I had completely cut off contact, assuming the entire extended family would follow my parents' narrative. But then, an unexpected email arrived. It was from my Aunt Clara, a distant relative my mother had completely alienated. The subject line read, "About the wedding." She didn't condemn my parents, she simply apologized for her years of silence. "We all saw it, Zuri," she wrote. "We just didn't have your courage. Your stand gave me the strength to finally protect my own peace." That email wasn't just support, it was the ultimate, private validation that I hadn't been crazy all those years. At the university, the quiet support continued. My dean, a very formal man, pulled me aside. He didn't mention the restraining order, but he did reference my unwavering commitment to ethical boundaries, offering me a prestigious research grant. The professional world respects clear, decisive action. They understood that my use of the law wasn't drama, it was self-defense. The whole incident elevated my reputation, confirming me as a person who defends her principles, regardless of the cost. My expertise in corporate law suddenly felt deeply personal. Evan's role shifted from co-conspirator to life partner in the truest sense. He didn't just support the plan, he championed my recovery. One night, we watched the wedding footage, not the joyous parts, but the moment I read the invoice. He simply said, "That's the day I married the real Zuri." He wasn't afraid of my strength or my justified rage. He loved the woman who had fought for her freedom, not the compliant daughter who always sought permission. His unconditional acceptance was the greatest balm to my decades of emotional wounds. The silence was my freedom, but the support was my foundation. The people who matter, the people who were truly ethical and kind, stayed. The toxic crowd dispersed. My revenge story ultimately became a story about connection, finding the people who honor your full self, including your boundaries. Your fight for self-preservation is often the trigger for others to find their own voice. The question isn't if they'll stop talking about me, but when they'll realize that the audience only believes the one with the documented truth. What truths are you still holding back that could unlock your own wave of support? 1 year. Our first anniversary wasn't about lavish gifts or huge parties, it was about the profound, quiet comfort of shared safety. We celebrated the stability we built, dollar by reclaimed dollar, boundary by firm boundary. We bought a small house in a quiet, different neighborhood, a place where no one knew the family and its toxic history. It was a physical and emotional distance I desperately needed. Our marriage was our fortress, built not against the world, but against the ghosts of my past. Without the constant emotional drain, my professional life flourished. I published my first book on corporate governance, detailing the dangers of unchecked entitlement, a theme I now understood intimately. I stopped chasing promotions for the wrong reasons and started focusing on genuine scholarship. That was the most powerful form of control, directing my own energy, without seeking validation or approval from the people who never intended to give it. I had found my true power, not in revenge, but in productive, authentic self-expression. Evan's family became my haven. They were generous, but their generosity came with no strings attached. They respected our no when we needed quiet time and celebrated our successes without demanding a cut. I saw, for the first time, what a healthy family dynamic looked like, one based on mutual respect, not hierarchy or financial coercion. I was learning to receive love without expecting a hidden price tag. This process of reparenting myself through their example was the gentle, final stage of my recovery. I occasionally hear through very distant channels that Piper's life is exactly where she left it. After her engagement was broken, she returned to living with our parents, perpetuating the toxic cycle. She never found a job and still relies entirely on Frank and Martha's rapidly diminishing resources. The difference is, I no longer feel pity, only a quiet understanding of consequence. She made her bed by choosing entitlement over empathy. Her ongoing suffering is no longer my responsibility or my concern. Thanks to the legal victory, we recouped nearly all of the $215,000, and Piper's payment ensured our new home down payment was secure. But the financial victory wasn't just the money. It was the ability to plan, to invest, and to dream. We opened a joint investment account, a fund for our future, built on mutual trust. We defined financial success not by the size of the assets, but by the level of freedom and peace they provided. The debt payments from my parents will continue for a few more years, a constant, faint reminder of the boundary. The greatest gift of this entire saga wasn't the recouped money or the legal victory. It was the ability to look at myself and see a survivor, not a victim. It was the knowledge that I stood up for myself, even when the cost felt insurmountable. I am finally living a life that is truly mine, defined by my values and my partner's unwavering respect. This is what true self-worth feels like, the quiet confidence that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. If you are considering cutting off a toxic family, remember this: the guilt is an illusion designed to keep you trapped. Your liberation is worth the initial pain. Don't engage in their drama, engage in your future. Get your legal documents in order. Get therapy. And most importantly, find your Evan, the person who validates your strength, not your compliance. The best revenge is living well, behind a permanent, professional firewall. I found my freedom when I traded my family's expectations for my own legal autonomy. My story proves that even the deepest-seated toxic cycles can be broken with courage and paperwork. Now that my life is truly my own, and the threats have stopped, I want to know your biggest question. What is the single most terrifying step you need to take to gain your own financial and emotional freedom from your family? Let me know in the comments below. We are 3 years in, and the focus is entirely on creation, not reaction. We're adding a new wing to the house, a literal and metaphorical expansion of our life. This blueprint represents everything my past family lacked: careful planning, mutual agreement, and a commitment to building something stable. There's no fear of sudden debt or hidden demands. We are building a life designed by choice, not by inherited obligation or toxic control. The foundation is trust, and the structure is freedom. My experience, once a source of shame, became the core of my professional identity. I now mentor young women in finance, teaching them not just about balance sheets, but about boundary sheets, the documents that protect their personal and professional integrity. I call it the ethical firewall. My revenge story evolved into a lesson plan. I realized that the greatest way to undermine a toxic system is to teach others how to escape it and prevent the next generation from being trapped. For so long, the idea of having children was terrifying. I was petrified of becoming my mother, of inadvertently passing on the cycle of trauma and financial abuse. But now, that fear is replaced by a profound sense of preparation. We have established our no-contact rules legally and emotionally. We are ready to break the cycle completely, and raise a child who knows they are loved unconditionally, without performing for approval or paying for their existence. Our legacy will be defined by unconditional love, not transactional debt. The debt repayment is still ongoing, a direct drain on my parents' already stretched retirement. They had to sell the yacht, then the vacation condo, not just because of the debt, but because their public reputation was irreparably damaged. No amount of social spin could fix the facts I presented. Their life is now a fraction of the opulent facade they worked so hard to maintain. I don't celebrate their misery, but I acknowledge the consequence. It's a reminder that accountability, when properly enforced, is total. For the first time, I take risks without calculating the familial fallout. I bought a classic car, my choice, my money, my joy. We travel spontaneously. I live without the fear of the phone ringing, bringing a new crisis or demand. This is what true life looks like when you are not defined by the needs of others. It is a life of spontaneity and self-trust, fueled by the conviction that I am the sovereign owner of my time, my assets, and my spirit. Let this be the ultimate takeaway: the revenge wasn't in the humiliation, it was in the paperwork. Contracts, restraining orders, clear no-contact letters, these are the tools of liberation. Emotional wounds require therapy, but toxic people require legal boundaries. Never underestimate the power of documentation to cut through the fog of emotional manipulation. It forces the narcissist to deal with reality, something they actively avoid. Use the law to build a bridge to your freedom. If you recognize any part of my struggle in your own life, the debt, the manipulation, the constant guilt, know this: you are not alone, and you are not crazy. Your desire for peace is valid. Your fight is necessary. The most radical act of self-love is choosing to disappoint your toxic family so you can honor yourself. That choice is the beginning of your new, hopeful future. Don't wait for permission. The only person who can start your revenge story is you. My life is now a testament to the fact that you can not only survive but thrive after family betrayal. I've shared the legal and emotional steps I took. Now, let's make this an ongoing conversation. If you could send one short, clear message to your younger self before you started your battle, what would it be? Share your wisdom and help empower others in the comments below. And remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories of self-sovereignty. You've witnessed my journey from family ATM and scapegoat to a financially sovereign woman. The goal wasn't just to win, it was to reclaim my life. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with the 5 non-negotiable lessons I learned the hard way. Lesson 1: the guilt is a weapon. It's designed to keep you compliant, dismantle it with facts. Lesson 2: legal paperwork is your armor. Emotional boundaries fail, written contracts and legal orders hold up. Never fight on their emotional turf. Lesson 3: detachment is destiny. You must grieve the family you deserved before you can accept the reality of the one you have. Stop waiting for an apology that will never come. Lesson 4: accountability is total. For toxic people, the loss of status and reputation is often a harsher punishment than financial cost. Use public facts to enforce private boundaries. This is how you permanently shift the power dynamic. And finally, Lesson 5: your new life is the best revenge. Focus your energy on building a life of authentic joy, professional success, and unconditional love, like the one Evan and I share. True victory isn't their downfall, it's your unburdened happiness. I am now safe, free, and thriving, and that is the only closure I needed. I chose self-sovereignty over inherited misery, and you can, too. Your story deserves a peaceful ending. I showed you my battle plan. Now it's your turn. Which of these 5 lessons is the single most terrifying step you need to take this week to reclaim your own sovereignty? Tell me in the comments below. Let's start your liberation today. Like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who needs their own ethical firewall. Your freedom is waiting.